Hello gamers, Matthew here from Grey Army Gaming. For this video, we are going to be taking a look at a brand new role-playing game that I have created called Pressure. What I'd like to do is walk through the basic rules, show you some of the game mechanics associated with Pressure, so that you can go ahead and try it out for yourselves, play test it. As always, I welcome your feedback. If you'd like to send me comments or leave comments in these videos, I would be super happy to get your feedback so I can continue to improve the game. I can also mention that there is a free PDF of the game, the rules for the game, and character sheets that you are able to download at the link below. Feel free to click on there if you want to download and follow along now as we walk through the rules in this video, or if you just want to read it on your own and start playing, go ahead and do that. For this game, you're going to need some special supplies to play. First of all, you're going to need a copy of the core rules, so go ahead and download that PDF when you play this. In addition, you are going to need character sheets. And now the character sheets are included in this rules sheet. I have it more towards the back of the booklet. So here you see, for example, an example of the character sheet. And here's some more information about character archetypes. We'll get to that in a little bit. In addition to that, you're going to need the GM sheet. Now, I've included that as a part of the game rules as well. The GM sheet is going to give you some of these different charts that are going to help you out if you want to follow along the charts in order to make the rules clearer. You're also going to need these things here in the back called pressure buildup trackers. So we'll walk through these things as well as we get to the end of this run through. You're going to need some fate dice. Now, I'm going to be using fate dice for our rolls in this game. That's all we use is fate dice, nothing else. So go ahead and pick up some of those. You probably won't need anything more than 5, but if you have several people playing on your table, you might want to pick up a bunch of them. I got a group of, 10 or 12 here that cost me next to nothing. You're going to need a tracking system to display the pressure build-up rule. Now, of course, you can do that on paper with pen, but I've created my own tracking system here. I've just built it out of a piece of wood and some washers, painted it up, and here is my tracker right here. It's magnetized, which is kind of fun, so I can move through this. We'll explain the pressure tracker in a little bit, but like I said, you don't need to have something fancy like that. You can just use a piece of paper. You are going to need a timer of sorts. Now, you might want to have a hourglass if you want, but you're going to need specific times when you play. So I would recommend that you have a cell phone or another timer that you can set in the exact time. Cell phones work great for this. A timer app on a mobile phone, yeah, that's perfect. You're going to need some note cards or some small pieces of paper here and a pen so that you can write what I'm going to call the disadvantageous questions or the dis questions. And also, it wouldn't hurt for you as the GM and for players to have a notepad and pens for taking notes. So a few supplies you're going to need. You can gather these together as we begin to walk through the rules. Let's go ahead now and take a look at character creation. The pressure rules system works best with 3 to 5 players along with the GM, and there are several different ways that you can create your groups and create your characters. Now, one option is simply to go through the list of archetypes. We'll get to that in a second, and pick out an archetype that you like. Maybe you want to be the contemplative, or maybe you want to be the brute, or maybe you want to be the evangelist, or whatever it is. Pick out an archetype that sounds cool to you, and just go with that, and then you can base your character upon the archetype. The second option is to begin by picking out characteristics that you want. So if maybe you want to have a more physical character, maybe you want to have a mental character, or a social character, or a spiritual character, pick out the characteristics that you like, and then once you do that, go back and find which kind of archetype your characteristics represent. A third option is to work together with the other players in the group to try to find archetypes and mix and match them in a way that might help you work best as a character, as a group together. And the fourth option is to just do a random character creation. This, of course, requires a D4, so you can go ahead and roll with a D4 die in order to get a random character that you can then go ahead and fill out the details for. So once you've solidified your archetype and characteristics, give your character a name along with a description. In addition, come up with 5 common items that would be appropriate to your particular archetype that you then write in the notes items box. And if you have any additional notes, go ahead and add these as well to the same box. So let's go ahead and take a look at the character sheet here really quickly and just show you in a little more detail what I mean here. The character sheet looks something like this, extremely simple. Now, if you look here, you have the name on the top here, archetype, a description of your character if you want to go ahead and explain how your character looks a little bit, some sort of special things about your character, maybe how your character looks both physically, but also maybe some special things about your character that maybe other people don't know. Characteristics here. Now, this is going to be the important part for your character. You are always going to have a primary characteristic and a secondary characteristic. Now, there are 4 different characteristics here. We have physical, we have mental, we have social, and we have spiritual. Now, here's the thing. If you want to max out your character in one of these, you can go ahead and put a +2 in the box. Let's say we do spiritual, a +2. That means I would have spiritual would be both my primary and secondary. But maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to have your primary, you want to be spiritual, but then you also want to have, say, mental. So maybe I would put a +1 for spiritual and circle the P for primary. And then I would put a +1 under mental and circle the S for secondary. So you can go ahead and fill those in however you like. And what you're going to do now is once you've done that, you're going to look at what kind of archetype you have if you haven't already picked an archetype. And you see the different archetypes are listed underneath: physical, mental, social, spiritual. So, for example, if we look at spiritual here, if you have spiritual +2 bonus there, so both your primary and secondary characteristics are spiritual, you would then be the priest or the priestess. Now, let's say your primary one is spiritual, but you also have a physical point. Well, then you would be the holy warrior. If spiritual is your primary and mental is 1, you would then be the theologian. If spiritual is your primary and social is 1, you would then be the evangelist. So you can see here with these different characteristics, based on how you assign your primary characteristic and your secondary characteristic, you're going to land in a different archetype. So this is pretty fun. You have a total of 16 different archetypes. And these are really cool based on the kind of character you want to play. You can select them out or assign your characteristics in that way. So this is important that you know, however, which one is primary characteristic and which one is secondary characteristic, because that's going to make a difference later. You can look here on the stress tracker here, because after you take so many stress points, you lose your bonus. First, your secondary bonus, and then you lose your primary bonus. And then when you get to this point here, your character is considered fallen. We'll explain what this means in a little more detail. Here's a box for your notes and items that you can go ahead and fill in. The items that you have, you're given 5 items, and any other notes you want to put about your character, you can go ahead and just write that in here. And as well, in the bottom here, bottom right, I've included a quick reference for skill checks, because skill checks are the primary way in which we determine whether your characters are successful or not. So that's a very helpful box. You can come back to that. So you see here a very simple character sheet, just 1 page, 4 characteristics, primary, secondary, not really much other than that. The point here is to keep it as simple as possible so that you can play your character and just throw yourself into the situations. A word here about game flow. Now, game flow moves in 3 simple phrases. First, the GM describes a scene or situation as well as raises a challenge. Second, the players take actions, usually involving skill checks when they will roll dice. And then third, the success or failure of these actions leads to the resolution of the situation or to a new situation which you as the game master describe for the players. At this point, the process starts again from the beginning, and the cycle repeats itself in this manner throughout the duration of the session. Now, in pressure, there is a difference between what I'm calling normal role play and pressure situations. Now, normal role play does not typically involve a timed element. But as skill checks are performed and pressure dice are rolled, these are our pressure dice, our fate dice, then the game moves closer and closer to pressure situations. So let me explain to you what that looks like. Whenever you roll a die, let's say you make a skill check, and I'll explain skill checks in a second, but whenever you roll a die and you get a blank side on your fate dice, so here is a 1 blank side. Whenever you get a blank side, you add a point for each blank die to your pressure tracker. If I were to have to roll 2 here, for example, I would then have 2 points. Now, what this means is that as you are taking skill checks, your players are rolling more and more blank faces, which means that the pressure tracker is moving closer and closer to this red point here all the way on the right. As soon as they hit that, the group immediately moves into what is called a pressure situation. And I can go ahead and explain that a little bit later in the rules. Let's go ahead and say something about skill checks. Now, not all actions require skill checks. If an action is easy to carry out for the character, for example, if you're ordering a drink or climbing a normal ladder, etc., it does not require a skill check. So simply role play the action and its results. Now, if, however, there is an element of difficulty involved in the action, the character is required to take a skill check. The player now declares which action is to be attempted, and following this, the GM determines both the characteristic to which the skill belongs to. Now, this could be a physical skill, it could be a mental skill, a social skill, or a spiritual skill, or it could be a combination of several of these. And the GM also sets the difficulty level, which is the difficulty for an average person. Now, difficulty levels are set according to the following list here. Moderate difficulty would be 3. Difficult would be 2, extreme difficulty would be 1, and impossible would be 0. Now, these different levels here, 3, 2, 1, 0, represent the number of dice to be rolled. So, for example, if the action is primarily social in nature and it is difficult, the GM would call out social 2. And if a character has any bonus in the characteristic called out by the game master, that character would add that bonus to the number of dice rolled. So, for example, if the game master calls out social 2 and the character has a +2 bonus in social because the person has chosen the charismatic archetype, then that character would roll 2 dice for the social 2 plus 2 for the bonus. So let's go ahead and roll these out and see what we get. Now, I rolled 4 minuses here, which is a massive failure and a very unlikely event. But let's go ahead and explain to you how you interpret the results of these dice. It is important to know that if you roll any pluses in your roll, it is only the pluses that are counted. If no pluses are rolled, then count the number of minuses as your result. Now, if only blank sides are rolled, now, no matter how many they are, if it's 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., if only blank sides are rolled, take away all the dice except for 1 and roll 1 die alone and take the result of that for the skill check. And this is called the under pressure effect. If a blank is rolled again on the single dial while under pressure, this counts as a mild failure. Interpretation of results will work like this according to this chart. If there is 1 plus that goes through, whether it's a plus and a blank or just 1 plus by itself, you would consider this a mild success. So you as the game master would interpret this as yes, but. So there was a success, but something negative happened. If there are 2 pluses, you would interpret this as a yes. Now, if there are 3 pluses, you would interpret this as a yes and. So yes is successful and something else good happens. Now, in addition to that, you would also be able to remove 1 stress point from the character sheet. So as we will get to we'll explain this later, your characters will be gathering stress points when negative things happen. If you roll 3 pluses, you can remove 1 stress point. Now, if we look over on the failure side of the chart here, 1 minus, and even if there's a bunch of blanks, if there's 1 minus, that would be a mild failure. So that would be no, but. So no, you failed, but there's still something good to that, something positive that came out of it. 2 minuses is a stronger failure, so it's just a straight up no. And potentially, this is up to you as a game master, depending on what kind of failure it is, there might be a stress point that is involved in that. And also now here, if you roll 3 minuses, that is an extreme failure. No, and something additional. You not only fail, but something additional bad happens. And in addition to that, you will suffer 1 automatic stress point. So let me go ahead and give you some examples of this. With a mild success, a yes, but, here's an example. The character may be able to climb a difficult wall, but at the same time, the wall starts to crumble. Yes is simply yes, yes, and. Here's the example. The character may convince a shopkeeper to sell a particular item to him or her, and in addition, the shopkeeper actually offers a price well below the item's value. So this would be a success on a, say, a social skill. Let's say we do a mild failure, no but. An example of this could be that a character attempts to row a boat through some rapids. The boat begins to sink, but the character catches sight of several life jackets under one of the seats in the boat. No is just a straight up no, and then a extreme failure would be no and. And an example of this would be the character attempts to smash her way through a locked door to no success, and in addition, the character also dislocates her shoulder in the attempt. So let's just give you one more example. Let's say that they're going to take a spiritual check. They're going to try to discern whether or not there is an evil force that is at work in a ship that they have just entered. So you call out a difficulty of 2. But your main roller has a +1 in spiritual, so they roll 3 dice. You would see here that there is 1 positive. Remember, you only look at the positives. If a positive is rolled, take away the other ones, which means this would be a mild success. So yes, they are able to discern that there is a spiritual nature, but it's not very clear what kind of spiritual nature it is. As we mentioned before, every time that you roll dice and they show blanks, you will then add 1 pressure point to your pressure tracker. So in this case, we have 2 blanks. That would be 1, 2. Now you continue in this fashion for skill checks until you get to the 10th and the final point here on the pressure buildup tracker. And at this point, you would then move immediately from normal role play to a pressure situation where the GM narrates this. We will walk you through a pressure situation soon, but we can also mention a few other things. Once the pressure situation is resolved, and I'll explain what that means, you then return back to normal role play. So you can go ahead and move your pressure tracker down here, take it off, and prepare now for the next pressure buildup. When the players roll blanks, you will then continue to build up the pressure. So yeah, you will go through a normal, back to normal role play after we conclude our pressure situation. Now, what's interesting about pressure points, however, is that at any point in the game, a player can spend or take a stress point to counteract a pressure point. So, for example, let's say that we are getting extremely close to a pressure situation, and one of the player rolls the dice, and there's one more pressure point that is going to be added because of the blank, and that would move us into a pressure situation. Maybe the group doesn't want to get into a pressure situation, so one of the players says, I'll take a stress point. So they'll mark on their sheet a stress point, which means that will counteract this roll, and we will not move us into a pressure situation. This can happen at any time. A player can take as many stress points as they want. If they want to take 3, 4, 5, 6 stress points to counteract any pressure dice that are rolled, they are free to do that. But remember, every time they take a stress point, they are hurting themselves. Let's go ahead now and walk you through a pressure situation. Let's say that we roll our last pressure die, which means that we are moving into a pressure situation. Now, immediately, the Game Master takes over, and the Game Master announces we are now entering a pressure situation. And what this means now is there is going to be a time pressure element that is introduced to the game. To start off, but we can follow this chart here to show you the specific order of how this will work. Now, that we begin here by the Game Master describing the present situation. And the Game Master, you can be as detailed as you want. Describe the most relevant elements for the situation before we even start the timer element, so that the players are able to understand where they are and the stakes of the situation. Now, the players are allowed here to ask simple clarification questions about the situation before you start. So once we do that, then the Game Master is going to go ahead and pose what I'm calling the disadvantageous question, or the dis question. And this will be a question that is in yes or no format. And what the Game Master is going to do is write out this question on the note card or on a piece of paper that is placed in the center of the table. So here we can go ahead and write out a question. The question that we are going to pose for our players is this. Do the police arrive? So that is the yes or no question. Do the police arrive before the group is able to accomplish the specific task they have to accomplish, whatever the task is that they are caught in? So here's our question. Now, once we have the question, then the GM will start the timer. Now, the initial time to be set will be as follows. The number of minutes that the group has is equal to the number of players. So let's go ahead and say that we are playing with 3 players in addition to the Game Master. So we are going to go ahead and pull out our timer. In this case, we are going to be using a phone, and we will set it now to 3 minutes. Action starts now with the player that is most affected in the situation, and after this, you can either move clockwise around the table for the next player's turn, or if you want, you can jump around in more of a spontaneous fashion. For this rule set, I have set it up that you move clockwise, but I think it can also be fun to make it really stressful as you just let the players go crazy and let them do whatever they need to do during this time. So you go ahead and you start your timer. Now we've got 3 minutes on our timer. And in this time, the players are going to make skill checks for difficult actions that they are attempting. Let's say they are stuck in a room and they have to get out of this room before the police arrive because maybe they are bank robbers and they are trying to steal some money from a vault and the doors lock on them. They can't get out. The police have been called. They have to get out of this room as quickly as possible. They have 3 minutes to do it. Now, the players are going to be doing different skill checks. Maybe they're going to try to figure out if there is a technical way they can get out of this room, or maybe they want to try to break down the door. So they're going to be taking skill checks. They're going to be taking mental checks. Maybe they want to cast a spell and pray or something. They're going to do maybe a spiritual check, or maybe there is somebody else in the room or a different room. They're going to try and convince them to help them out. Maybe they need to make a social check, so on and so forth. But they're going to be making social checks and rolling the whole time to see if they succeed or not, and just follow the normal chart for skills there. A little note here, you're not going to count any of the blank dice during pressure situations. They don't matter at this point. You're just focused on the time and getting done with this. So your group is going to continue on, and either one of two things is going to happen. Either in the time that you have, the situation is going to be resolved in favor of the players. So let's say that they break out of the room and they're able to escape the bank and to run out into the dark streets and avoid the police. Well, then we would say the situation is resolved, and then we would return back to normal role play in which the story is continued on and the players continue to move towards their goal, taking skill checks. And at this point, now we would reset to normal role play, and any blank die would once again introduce more pressure points. So that's one option here. However, there's another option, and that is that time runs out. And when time runs out, then you pause the game, you pause the role play, and the Game Master now will take a single fate die and roll this. And we will then interpret this in the following way. If there is a plus that is rolled, the answer to the question that you initially pose will be yes. You resolve the situation with its negative consequences, and players also suffer 1 stress point because they are getting stressed now because the time ran out and the question resolved the affirmative. If there is a minus that is rolled, that would be a no. And then you start the timer again with the same number of minutes as the preceding time. So in this case, we would start the timer again with 3 minutes and see if the group can continue on. If, however, we roll a blank, I call this pressures on. What we would do then is remove 1 minute from the preceding time and start the timer again. So we had initially started with 3 minutes. Let's say we roll a blank. We would then move the timer to 2 minutes and start the timer again, throw the group right back into the situation, let them continue on to try to resolve the situation. If you begin the timer with only 1 minute, let's say you get down to 1 minute, either because you moved down or because you only started with maybe 2 minutes and you went down to 1 minute, or maybe you're playing with only one person and you start at 1 minute. Well, as soon as that minute is over, if the group or the person doesn't resolve the issue at that time, then the issue will be resolved as if it were a yes. So here's what yes means. You resolve the situation with negative consequences. So the police arrive, everyone takes a stress point. No, start the timer again. And blank would mean pressure's on, remove a minute, and make the time go again. Once again, once the pressure situation is resolved, we move back to normal role play. We move our pressure tracker off of here, and we then go back to the story as normal. At this point, we can go ahead and say something about stress and stress points. At any point in the game, whether in normal roleplay or pressure situations, the game master may assign stress points to the characters. Now, this is entirely up to the discretion of the game master and should be used when it makes sense to the narrative. And in addition, the game master may assign stress points at the end of a pressure situation when time is up and the players have not adequately resolved the situation. And moreover, characters also sustain an automatic stress point as the result of an extreme failure on a skill check. And that, remember, is a roll of 3 minuses. If you do roll 2 minuses, the player may sustain a stress point, but this is, of course, left up to the discretion of the game master. And the result, if it's a really negative result, then yeah, maybe you'll give them a stress point. Maybe you'll even give them more than 1 stress point. Now, stress may assume 4 different forms that correspond with the 4 characteristics. And this is what I like about this game. It's not just about physical stress. It could be physical stress, but it could also be mental, it could be social, and it could be spiritual. So when you're assigning stress, the game master begins by identifying which kind of stress is suffered, as well as the severity of the stress. And severity is determined in the following manner. 1 stress point would be moderately debilitating stress. 2 stress points would be severe stress, and that is severely debilitating. And extreme stress would be 3 stress points, which is critically debilitating. So the game master has to decide what kind of stress is suffered by the character given the situation and what has happened. Now, any bonuses that a character has in a particular characteristic mitigates that type of stress for the character. So, for example, a brute has a +2 on their physical characteristic. So if a brute takes extreme physical stress, in the end they would only suffer 1 stress point, because you'd have 3 physical stress minus 2 points from the bonus would leave you with 1 stress point. So in determining stress, the game master should be clear about 3 things. Who the stress affects. It could affect 1 or several characters. What kind of stress occurs, 1 or several characters. And 3, the severity of the stress. One additional point here, and we're going to explain this a little more clearly when we look at the character sheet, is that on the 5th stress point, the character suffers -1 to his or her secondary characteristic bonus. And on the 9th stress point, the character suffers -1 to his or her primary characteristic bonus. And these may be restored if the player regains enough stress points to a point on the stress tracker before the characteristic bonus was lost. Any character who suffers 12 stress points in the session is considered fallen and is no longer able to take action. So stress points can lead to your character being out of the game unless the other characters are able to help you and remove some of your stress. Stress points are removed at the start of a new session if you're playing more than 1 session, and the character bonuses are also restored to normal. And here's a quick close-up of the stress tracker on the character sheet. And you can see here, as you take stress points, you can just mark off these circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On your 5th stress point, you lose -1 to your secondary characteristic. Note, however, if you have both of your primary and secondary on the same characteristic, you would simply move from a +2 to a +1. On the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th one, stress point that is endured, you will then lose a -1 to your primary characteristic. And then, of course, on the 10, 11, 12th one, the 12th point suffered, you will be considered fallen and no longer to take actions. Let's talk now about pressure overloads. I love these things. This gives a little bit more power to the game master. At any point in the game master may trigger a pressure overload. And now what this means is that regardless of the pressure buildup, no matter where it is on the pressure tracker, the game master may, according to his or her discretion, immediately throw the players into a pressure situation. Now, this is great, a little tool for the game masters. If you feel like you need to ratchet up the intensity a little bit more, then you have the freedom to do that. Now, we have 3 tokens here, and at any moment in the game master can throw in a token and say, pressure overload, which would immediately move you out of normal role play and into a pressure situation. Now, once that is resolved, then we would immediately go back to normal role play, and we would leave the tracker where it is. So you don't need to touch the tracker at all. And this is like I said, the Game Master has the ability to trigger 3 pressure overloads during the game, 3 times per session. And these should, of course, be used sparingly and only when they fit well with the ongoing narrative, but they can also be a powerful tool for game masters to keep up game intensity and momentum. And I should just mention that pressure overloads lead to pressure situations, and then you just follow the normal rules for pressure situations to resolve that. A couple notes here about session length and session resolution. Sessions typically cover a single day of game time. So that is a 24-hour period from sunrise to sunrise. For a short game, play until 5 pressure situations have been resolved. For a long game, you might want to play until 10 pressure situations have been resolved. Alternatively, just end the session when it feels most narratively appropriate. It's always good to talk with your players beforehand about how many pressure situations you want to have and how long of a game you want to have. So pressure is a role-playing game that has a bit of the feel of a board game. It works well with the single session one-shot format, where a session can be played in something like 2 to 3 hours and ended after that. And this allows players the chance to try out different characters and archetypes each time if they want. And at the same time, it's possible to run more extended campaigns over several sessions. But once again, just decide with your players how many of these pressure situations you want to have in a game, or if the players are willing to let you as a game master decide, you can end it wherever you think it is narratively fitting. I've included here in the back these different charts for you as a game master, where I have the different pressure situations listed and numbered here. So you can go ahead and follow along. If you don't have one of these pressure tracking devices, you can just use this and mark it off until you get to this pressure situation. That's your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, so on and so forth. And once again, you can decide how many pressure situations you want to play in the game and conclude the narrative after that, or you can just conclude it when the narrative feels like it's come to a good stopping point. And finally, before we do a little flip through here of the charts, we can just mention something about the solo option for this game. Pressure, I think, works best with a group, but it is also possible to play the game in a solo format. In that case, you as the solo GM player will need to drive the narrative, to call for skill checks, to set difficulty levels, and to assign stress to yourself. And although this might sound like a daunting task, a small amount of common sense and logic will be adequate to help you through the session. So in other words, it should be rather apparent when a skill check needs to be made, how difficult the skill is that is to be attempted, and how much stress is incurred from failures and other negative consequences. So by moving along in this fashion, it will be possible for you as the solo GM player to keep an exciting narrative alive. I hope in the future videos I'm able to actually run you through how the solo option would actually look with pressure. So stay tuned for that video in the future. In order to bring this video to a conclusion, let's just go ahead and walk you through the charts that I have provided in this basic rules rulebook. The first chart is going to be the pressure character sheet. We've already explained this a little bit. It's got everything that you need for your characters. Down here, you have the quick reference for skill checks. Extremely helpful when you as a player are going to be rolling your dice and as the game master is going to be interpreting them. In addition, I have provided the pressure archetypes chart here. And this has all of the archetypes that are listed with physical, mental, social, spiritual. It has the different primary and secondary characteristics. So you can go ahead and look through here, pick out your character. Or like I said before, you can pick out your characteristics and then find out which one of the archetypes matches with those characteristics. In a future version of this rulebook, I would actually like to develop each one of these and have like a single page for each one of them where I give a slight description of, well, what is the contemplative archetype like? What kind of person is the contemplative, to give players even more ideas for how to develop their characters. This is a chart now for the Game Master. We start up here with game flow, how the Game Master describes a scene, player action, resolution of a new situation, and so the loop, the feedback loop here as you're playing. This chart has to do with skill checks. It walks you through how to do this. The player suggests an action. It's either easy, no check required, or it's difficult. The GM, you select the difficulty levels here. Player rolls the number of dice equal to the difficulty level, plus any characteristic bonuses. And this explains how you interpret that. Only pluses are counted. If no pluses are rolled, then it's only the minuses are counted. If it's only blanks, then you would remove all the dice except for one and re-roll that again. Here's the interpretation of success or failure, and it's the exact same chart on the character sheet. We already explained this little chart here. This is for you game masters. If you want to track the pressure buildup and if you want to set a limit for how many pressure situations you're going to have in your game. I've got it set up 5 for a short game and 10 for a long game. Of course, you can pick as many as you want, or you don't even need to follow that if you just want to end it after the narrative. The next page is pressure situations, and now this is where there is a time element involved, and this just walks you through the steps in that, how the GM describes the situation, players are able to ask questions. The GM poses the question, the disadvantageous question, yes or no format, writes it down. Starting the timer, number of minutes is number of players. Action plays out, and you go ahead and just role play now with this pressure, time pressure going on at the same time. Skill checks are made, and you do not count any of the pressure dice during those skill checks. Either the situation is resolved and you go back to normal role play, or the time is up. You roll a die to determine the status of the question. Roll your die and interpret it. You may either get a yes, a no, where you start the timer again, or you have a blank, which means you remove a minute and start the timer again. Over here, we have a chart for stress and stress points. And the first box is, it tells you that as a result of negative consequences of a pressure situation or due to negative consequences during normal role play, the GM assigns stress points. So what we need to do then is to identify what kind of stress from the 4 characteristics, and then determine the severity of the stress, whether it is normal stress, severe stress, or extreme stress. And any bonus in a characteristic mitigates stress, and we talked about that in with the example of the brute. And then the character will go ahead and fill in the stress points on the character sheet. If the character reaches fallen, the character is no longer able to take action in the game. And finally, the last thing that we have here is our pressure overloads here. If you don't have tokens to use, you can just simply use these little red stars here and just fill in the circles whenever you use a pressure overload. So that is it for this rules booklet. Like I mentioned before, there is a link that I have provided where you are able to download the booklet for yourself. Go ahead and give a read through and start to play test this game. I would love to get your feedback and to hear about your stories about how the game has gone for you. Well, there you have it, folks. A quick run through of Pressure, a role playing game of the highest intensity. I have play tested this with my neighbors, and it is really a fun game. There are, of course, things that need to be fixed. It's not a perfect game, but I think this is a good start to developing something that could really be a fun game, a way to get kids and new players into role playing. It's a really exciting game. It goes quickly. The pressure makes it super intense and super fun. I think it's really a good game with simple rules, easy rules, very basic, but lots of fun. I would really appreciate if you want to give it a try and go ahead and play test it on your own with your own friends, your own group, and go ahead and contact me in the comments below, or go ahead and write me and let me know how it goes. Let me know what kind of adventures you had, if you had fun or not, the things that could be improved, the things that you liked, and hopefully then we can continue to improve this game and come out with a newer, more polished version in the future. If you like this kind of content, you want to see more videos, especially if you want to see more videos about Pressure, maybe like a solo run through of the game, then please do give me a thumbs up, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I will continue to make more videos like this in the future. And most importantly, thank you for joining us here today at Gray Army Gaming for the future of gaming.